And we're going to continue with the second chapter of The House with the Clock and Its Walls. Lewis decided to follow his Uncle Jonathan around the house while he turned clocks off. He's careful not to turn on lights in any rooms, which Lewis thinks is pretty weird, and his uncle can tell he thinks this is weird, so he begins to tell him the story of the original owner of the house, Isaac Izard, who was a warlock. "What's that?" Uncle Jonathan looked very serious. "It's the word for a male witch." Lewis shuddered. Then out of nowhere, a strange thought came to him. "Are you one too?" he asked in a tiny, frightened voice. Jonathan looked at him with a strange smile. "Would it scare you if I was?" "No, I like you an awful lot, and you can be a warlock if you want to be one, I guess. You wouldn't be a bad one, I know." "That depends on how you mean bad," said Jonathan, chuckling. "If you mean I wouldn't be an evil one, you're right. If you mean I wouldn't be too bad at wizarding, well, I don't know. I'm pretty much a parlor magician, though I have a few tricks that go beyond rabbits and playing cards." "Like stained glass windows and coat racks?" said Lewis, grinning. "Yes, exactly like those. And just to make you perfectly secure, let me inform you that Mrs. Zimmerman is also a wizard, though in her case the term should be witch." "Couldn't you find a better name?" asked Lewis timidly. "Well, she prefers maga or enchantrix, but I can't use such words without breaking up, so she's Old Witch Florence to me. She's really a much more serious wizard than I am. She got her D.Mag.A., that's Doctor Magicorum Artium, from the University of Gothenburg in Germany in 1922. I just have an A.B. from Michigan Agricultural College." "What in?" asked Lewis, as if he were interviewing Jonathan for a job. Actually, he was interested in Jonathan's college work. Both of Lewis's parents had gone to college, and they always talked about their college work. "What in?" said Jonathan, blushing. "What in? Why, agricultural science, animal husbandry, and all that. I was going to be a farmer till my grandpa died and left me a pile of money. But back to Isaac Izard. You're still interested, aren't you?" "Oh, yes, of course. Please tell me. I want to know." "Isaac, as I say, was a wizard. He fooled around with black magic, the worst kind of thing a wizard can do. I can't tell you about everything bad that I absolutely know he did for sure, but one wizard can judge another. I'd say he was an evil one, a very evil one. Mrs. Zimmerman thinks so, too. She lived next door to him for years, remember? You'll have to ask her about him yourself, of course. But there were many evenings when she and I would stand in her backyard and look up and see old Isaac's evil face in the window of the cupola on top of the house. He'd be holding an oil lamp and just staring out at the night. Mrs. Zimmerman claims that he would sit for hours in a cupola during the day. He seemed to be taking notes." "Gee, this is weird. What was he taking notes for?" "Lord only knows, Lewis, but I'm sure it wasn't anything good. At any rate, to get on with my story, it must be getting pretty late by now, but without the clocks I have no idea what time it is. Where was I? Oh, yes. Old Isaac died during a wild thunderstorm, one of the worst in the history of Capernaum County. You can look it up in the New Zebedee Chronicle if you want to. Blown roofs off barns, trees uprooted, and a bolt of lightning melted the iron doors on the tomb Isaac is buried in now. I'll have to show you that tomb some day. Ugly old dump. One of those little stone houses for the respectable dead. There are several of them in our cemetery, some of them really fancy. This one was built by Isaac's family in the 1850s, but it was never used till they put his wife in there. She died before he did." "What was she like? Pretty strange, as you'd have to be to choose Isaac Izard for a husband. I don't remember anything about her but her eyeglasses." Lewis stared. "Her eyeglasses?" "Yes, I passed her one day in the street, and she turned and looked at me. It might have been the way the sun caught her spectacles, but I remember 2 freezing circles of gray light burning into me. I turned away and closed my eyes, but those 2 cold spots stayed there. I had nightmares for a week after that." "How did she die?" Lewis imagined Mrs. Izard falling from a cliff during a hurricane, or flinging herself from the cupola of the house. "How? Quietly and mysteriously. no funeral. Some strange-looking people from out of town came and helped Isaac bury her. After that, he went into seclusion. Further seclusion, that is. He and she had always been hermits, but after her death, he really shut himself up, built a big high-board fence between this house and Mrs. Zimmerman's. I had it torn down as soon as I moved in. He smiled contentedly. Louis felt that his Uncle Jonathan was happy living at 100 High Street, despite the fact that old Isaac Izzard had made the place his castle. "Is that all there is to the story?" asked Louis casually. "Oh, my, no. We're just getting to the good part. Look, here I am selfishly puffing away at this boat, and you have nothing. Let's go out to the kitchen and get a couple of glasses of milk and some chocolate chip cookies, okay?" "Sure," said Louis, who liked chocolate chip cookies even more than he liked Welch's fudge bars. In a few minutes, they were back in the study, sitting by the quietly crackling fire and munching cookies. Suddenly, a book fell out of the bookcase. Flop! 2 more fell out. Flop, flop! Louis stared at the black gap in the row of books. A long, withered, bony hand appeared. It seemed to be groping for something. Louis sat rigid with terror, but Jonathan merely smiled. "A little to your left, my dear. That's it. Now you've got it." A latch clicked, and a large section of the built-in bookcase swung outwards. More books fell to the floor, and there stood Mrs. Zimmerman, with a strand of cobweb hanging from her left eyeglass. Her sleeve was covered with whitish dust. "Fine way to build a secret panel," she grumbled, "with the latch on the room side instead of the passage side." "It adds to the mystery, dollface, as you might have guessed. Louis, this house has a secret passageway. You enter it through the china cupboard in the kitchen. Come on in, Florence. I was just going to tell Louis about the clock in the walls." Mrs. Zimmerman gave him a look as if to say, "Do you think that's a wise thing to do?" But she shrugged and helped herself to cookies and milk. "Good cookies," she said, munching. "Very good." "She always says that because she makes them," explained Uncle Jonathan, helping himself to 2 more. "And now that everyone's mouth is stuffed, including mine, I guess I'll go on. Where were we? Oh, yes. Well, I had no sooner moved in here than I felt something was wrong. The house had a kind of listening stillness, and then I heard it." "Heard what?" This was Louis, who had worked himself to the edge of his chair. He had even stopped eating his cookie. "The clock. You know how you can be in a room with a clock ticking and you won't notice it for a long time? Then when things are very, very quiet and you aren't thinking about anything particular, there it is." Louis jumped up and looked around wildly. "Where?" Jonathan laughed. No. I didn't mean to frighten you like that. I mean, I heard it for the first time in this room. It was ticking away in the walls. You can go over to that wall and listen for it if you like." Louis got up and walked over to the book-lined wall. He put his ear to a row of black leather volumes and listened. His eyes opened wide. "It is there, Uncle Jonathan, it is!" He was excited by the discovery, but then his face changed. He looked afraid. "What's it for, Uncle Jonathan? What's it do?" "I haven't the faintest idea," said Jonathan. "Though I know that I want to blot it out. That's why I have all these stupid clocks. I didn't used to be so fond of incessant ticking and sudden loud hell-raising every hour on the hour, but I prefer my clocks to his." Jonathan's face had turned grim. He shook his head, smiled a little half-hearted smile, and went on. "You may be wondering why I don't just tear down the wall and rip out the clock. Well, it wouldn't do any good. It sounds like it's behind every wall, up in the attic, down in the cellar, in the closets and storerooms and parlors, and sometimes it seems to be slowing down. I keep hoping it will stop, but that it picks up and keeps going. I don't know what to do." There was a note of real despair in his voice. For a minute, Louis thought his uncle would cry. Then Mrs. Zimmerman broke in. "I'll tell you the thing you ought not to do, Jonathan Barnevelt. You oughtn't to frighten Louis with something you don't know anything about. After all, the ticking may be some leftover magic from the old Coots experiments, or death watch beetles, or an illusion of some kind, like the houses that have whispering galleries. I get a funny kind of hum in my head now, and then it goes doo for a while, and then it goes away." Jonathan looked irritated. "Oh, Florence, there's no need to kid around. You don't think it's something harmless, and neither do I. I wouldn't have told Louis just to frighten him, but I thought it would be better for him to know about the clock than to think that his uncle was getting ready for the loony bin. You see, he caught me making my nightly rounds." "Well," said Mrs. Zimmerman,
I don't know about the loony bin, but Uncle Jonathan had better be getting ready for Betty-Bye if he's going to take us on a picnic tomorrow. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a silver watch on a long chain. She popped the lid open and announced that it was 3 a.m. Jonathan looked up with surprise. Is it? Good grief, I had no idea. Please, Uncle Jonathan, said Louis, interrupting, can you tell me one more thing? Sure, Louis. What is it? Louis looked fidgety and embarrassed. Well, if the clocks are supposed to drown out the noise of the clocks in the walls, why do you stop them at night? Jonathan sighed. I don't stop them every night. Some nights I just walk around checking all the rooms. It makes me feel secure somehow. I can't explain it, but some nights, like this one, I get the urge to stop all the blasted everlasting ticking. I get the feeling that if I were to make the house quiet, perfectly quiet, then maybe I could hear the real clock, the magic one, ticking behind one particular wall, or in some cubbyhole, but it never works, and I always feel half crazy for trying. Louis still looked puzzled. If it's a magic clock, he said slowly, then wouldn't it be invisible? I mean, wouldn't it be something you couldn't actually put your hands on? Jonathan shook his head. Not really, Louis. Most magic is accomplished with solid everyday objects. Objects that have had spells set over them. One which I know tried to obliterate her enemy by leaving a photo of him under the running water of her gutter spout. Her reasoning was that he would die when the face on the picture was wiped out. It's a common method. No, Louis, this is a clock as real as Grandpa over there, only it's enchanted. But what it is enchanted to do, I don't for the life of me know. Well, I know something, Weirdbeard, said Mrs. Zimmerman, dangling her watch like a pendulum before Jonathan's eyes. I know that if we don't catch just a little teeny bit of shut-eye, we're all going to be wearing our crabby caps in the morning. Louis, off to bed. Jonathan, same with you. I'll rinse the cookie plates and put away the milk. Later, up in his room, Louis stood in the middle of the floor, staring at a patch of flowered wallpaper near the fireplace. He walked quickly over to the wall and put his ear to it. Yes, the ticking was here too. He walked across the room and listened to another wall. More of the same. Louis walked back to the center of the room, and then abruptly he began to pace. He paced in quick strides with his hands behind his back, the way he had seen his father do when he was upset. He paced and tried to think logically, but logic wasn't much help where the clock in the walls was concerned. So, at last, Louis gave up. He jumped into bed and went to sleep. And that's the end of Chapter 2.